Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. With Season 1 Reloaded, we of course saw a general meta update go live for Warzone that included various different buffs and nerfs for a handful of weapons. We also got the introduction of 2 new weapons as well. And so with that today, I wanted to go over the broad overview of the meta update and break down which weapons you want to be looking out for now, the absolute meta options, some more top tier competitive choices, and those weapons you want to avoid. So as we get into it, if you enjoy the video, do me a favor, drop a like on it. And of course, if you're new here, you want to guarantee that every single day you're up to date with all things going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. So we are here on our Warzone tier list, obviously specific just to Warzone. We'll be doing the same thing, but for multiplayer in a couple of days time, where there were a ton of updates as well. But obviously the 2 modes are very different. And the first thing we got to do here is talk about our brand new weapons here. We've got the HRM9 and the TAC Evolver. So initially, HRM9, I actually really like this thing. Statistically, its TTK is feeling really solid against some other close range SMGs. Also, the builds with it, the Grau iron sight barrel that you can use, really solid as well. I like the overall feel of this thing. Hip fire seems accurate, good mobility, like I said, easy to use. It's checking all the right boxes essentially. So that one's definitely a like top tier competitive based SMG, easily hanging with the other options in the game. And then the Evolver is kind of an interesting one. I've kind of been back and forth with this. Maybe it's just because of how the LMGs feel post update as is, but this is like 2 different LMGs in one. You can use 2 different ammo types, 7.62 or 5.56. 5.56 makes it feel a lot more aggressive and really easy to use. 7.62 is easy to use, if I'm being honest as well, but like either or feels like they can hold their own just fine. I'm just not sure if it's like a dedicated top tier LMG or if it's just more of like a competitive LMG. All right, some post edit Zach here. You'll see later on in the video, because we have the newer updates to go through as well with the Interceptor and the Swarm nerf in some time. But I initially dropped this into the top tier category. Definitely needs to be competitive though. We tested it further. True Game Data got full on details on it. It does feel like it's super accurate because it's low recoil, but the damage, even though it's deadly accurate, not all that crazy in 5.56 or in 7.62. Sometimes it feels like it's hitting, sometimes you're maybe going up against something that is just one of those crazy guns right now, but regardless, it's so easy to use and very aggressive and versatile, like the other LMGs that we've got. But then over to the side here, you'll see me checking periodically because I've got my handy dandy list of all the changes that were made to the various different weapons in the game, starting first with the Holger 5.56 rifle. It actually ended up seeing a brand new buff, but it was mainly like a close range damage buff there. It's already one of the top tier rifles, especially over range. It's particularly good, and so that's just going to keep it in top tier in all honesty. Now this one is a little disappointing to me. The M13B, one of the few MW2 guns that truly stood out as one of the best choices, got nerfed, and they nerfed its close damage, its mid damage, and its far damage. So across the board, the M13B just is not going to be an option that's able to hang with some of the other assault rifles in the game, in my opinion. Now, it's still competitive for sure, but it's certainly not one of those options that's clearly, okay, if I want a really solid rifle right now, I can use the M13B and it'll be reliable. That's just not the case now. And we got to scroll way down for this one because the MCW, for whatever reason, was just garbage before this update, but they did actually buff it. They buffed its close damage range and then also its mid damage as well. So it makes it a bit more versatile. They did nerf some of the more meta attachments for it with some barrels and stocks, but overall, the core damage there is going to be a little bit better now. So I'd say it's more so a competitive rifle than it was before. It's definitely not as mediocre as it was before, and it's more of an option now. I feel like it could go another step up in terms of more buffs in the future, and I'd like to see that because I want to use the MCW. It's one of my favorite guns, but it's still a tad bit underwhelming compared to some of these other choices. So for now, we'll leave it as competitive. But quite frankly, the MTZ 7.62 is one that probably could have been in absolute meta before this update, but now it did actually end up getting nerfed. They basically nerfed all damage ranges to it, close, mid, far. So that is something to take note of now. It's got that small magazine, so that is super limiting, but if you're going back and forth between semi-auto and full auto, it's still something that can have a pretty ridiculous TTK. So for me, I'm going to leave this in top tier mainly for that semi-auto potential, but even in full auto for like resurgence and whatnot, you can still get away with absolutely frying with this thing. Even though it's still a little bit weaker than it was before, it's still very good in comparison to where the rest of the meta is now. Now we got to talk the LMGs because a lot of these got basically the same nerfs, a close damage nerf and a far damage nerf, which in general is like the majority of the gunfights there. Starting with the Bruen Bruin, which was one of the better options in the game, mainly just because it, one, was super low recoil, but two, was like a steady decrease of damage over range. It didn't have super harsh drop-offs like a lot of other weapons in the game do. But this is a nerf that brings this in line with a lot of the other mid to long range guns, like some of these other LMGs and some of the rifles as well. It does expand the long range meta rather than it just being LMGs and LMGs alone. You have some more options now, so I think that is a good nerf, and it definitely does check the Bruin a little bit there. The DG also got this slight same nerf, close damage and far damage. It's super low recoil and one that's still going to be right there with the Bruin and some of these other options as well. The TAC Eradicator got the same thing, a close damage nerf and a far damage nerf. We're going to bring this one back down with the other LMGs as well. Really, if you want that fast TCK with the Eradicator, it depends on you landing your first 7 shots when that fire rate is faster. If you can do that consistently, it's still going to be really good and probably borderline meta there, but not everyone's going to be able to do that. That's an unrealistic expectation. So in those one-off fights where you can do it remotely consistently, it'll feel really good. Other times it might feel a little bit wonky. Still really good though, as are pretty much all the LMGs. Hey everyone, real quick, wanted to give a shout out to my friends over at G Fuel. Start your 2024 off right feeling energized and focused. You already know when I need that quick and easy boost, I'm going right for a fresh cup of G Fuel. Right now, my go-to flavors got to be Hype Sauce, Watermelon Limeade, and Starfruit. They're all bangers, but I mean, they got so many different flavor options. There's really something for everyone. So if you want to try G Fuel for the first time or maybe restock some of your favorites, throw in code Immortal at checkout. It'll get you that 20 to 30% off discount on everything on the site. And the link for that will be down in the description below if you're interested. Then the Peel Yacht. This is one that is really tough for me because they nerfed the conversion kit Peel Yacht build in specific. The normal Peel Yacht would be top tier or competitive as is. It's not that crazy, but the conversion kit makes it absolutely nuts. But they nerfed its close damage and its far damage as well. The only reason that I'm considering leaving this in absolute meta is because of how easy and how aggressive it is. Solo recoil, 100 rounds with great mobility for an LMG. Yes, its damage is going to be worse, but I feel like a lot of people are still going to be spamming the Peel Yacht in general, and so for that, I'm going to leave it in absolute meta for now. That's one we got to keep our eye on, though. Now, this is a nice buff. Admittedly, I'm probably giving the AMR9 a little bit more credit than it deserves initially here. It probably should be more towards mediocre or below average before this update, but post-update, it actually got a buff to all of its damage, close, mid, and far damage. So that's a really solid update to the AMR9. A very much so lacking SMG. It's definitely in the right category now, being competitive, and hopefully stands a bit more of a chance to get some other choices. Like when you get this in the Gulag or something, you find the ground loot, it was one they're like, okay, great, I'm gonna get fried no matter what somebody else has. Now it can hold its own a little bit more. All right, post-edit Zach here. Gotta shout out Tony, True Game Data, the man, the myth, the legend. When he went through and actually tested this update to the AMR9 did way more than it initially seemed on paper. So the AMR9 in a more thorough test definitely jumps up much higher. This thing is ridiculously good now. Definitely a top SMG choice moving forward. This is one that I'm a little bit bummed with, the ISO 9. This was by far the best MW2 SMG in the game, and it ended up seeing a decent nerf across the board. Its close, mid, and far damage all got nerfed here, so it was really the one option that could compete with the Wasp Swarm. Like, it could be borderline absolute meta in all honesty, but now, though, that nerf is going to knock it down some. I will say, looking at this top tier list, I feel like we probably need to update a good amount of these MW2 subs. Like, for instance, the Fennec is probably more so a competitive SMG. Same deal with the ISO 45, same deal with the ISO 9 now, and even same deal with the Lockman sub and the Bass P, if we're being honest. All of these, just compared to some of the other MW3 options, don't feel like they're holding their own nearly as much as they should be. So that's a bit unfortunate there, but kind of the harsh reality of the direction they want the meta right now. MW3 oriented for sure. Speaking of MW3 subs, the Rival 9 got a recoil buff. Its horizontal recoil is going to be easier to control now, and that's always a huge W, so it's going to be staying in top tier is a great choice there. And then also the Striker 9 ended up getting a mid to long damage buff, so it's going to be better for like sniper support in the mid range there. That also helps make it even more of a top tier SMG. Not absolute meta, but still really, really good. Then lastly, the Cat actually got nerfs to its meta loadout. They nerfed the velocity on the ammo in the barrel you're usually using, which just makes it a worse version of itself. It's still the only true one-shot sniper that can one-shot knock without using explosive ammo, so it's still the absolute meta sniper, but it's going to be worse than it was before. All right, now initially this was where the video was going to end, but it's actually convenient now because we actually ended up getting the new updates for the Interceptor and the Swarm just a little bit after the initial meta update went out, obviously, and these are what we were really waiting for. So now we can have an even more accurate list, and it gives me a chance to once again talk about that AMR 9. I bumped it up fully into the top tier, as I sort of alluded to earlier, just because its damage is insane now. It is extremely good if you're a decent player and can land those upper body shots. For what it's worth, though, it's also very unforgiving, so just be mindful of that for sure. But then when it comes to the Interceptor and the Swarm, the Interceptor got its damage nerfed like everywhere. This thing requires more shots to kill now. Keep in mind, it's already super limited on ammo, and its fire rate's not crazy, like for instance on the MCW 6.8 or even the Enforcer. So for me, this one, the Interceptor, it's going down towards competitive. I will say it's probably borderline top tier still, just because players are still going to cling to this thing. That's usually what happens with meta weapons in general, but it's a decent enough nerf that there's not really a reason to use the Interceptor over anything else in the game right now, whereas before this update, obviously, if you weren't using the Interceptor, you were at a disadvantage. So that's the much needed nerf for the Interceptor in general. The Swarm now in general also got that slight nerf to its mid-range and its long range. They also nerfed its near to mid damage, but that's not its max damage range. So for those ultra close range fights, it's still going to be good. It's just not absolute meta. So top tier, it's going to fall in line with those other great SMG options now, but you got a lot of variety in that SMG category, which is nice to see. Also, the Enforcer, I bumped that one up. It's probably borderline top tier and competitive as well. I like the MCW 6.8 just a little bit more though. Also, the Evolver, I've tested this more. Like initially when I played with it in Plunder, I was testing the range. It seemed all right, but maybe I was just running into players who weren't fighting back all that well because it was Plunder. But definitely, you know, looking at the stats a bit more on this thing, it's just decent enough that it's competitive for sure. So we'll drop it in here with the other LMGs, but I think I would be taking a couple of these other options over it as of now. It's all right and you can do well with it, but it's not top tier like you know, initially jumping in might tell you. But that being said, this meta is diverse, definitely a big step in the right direction. That is going to wrap things up for this video. If it helped you out, do me a favor, drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, you want to guarantee that every single day you are up to date with all things going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.